Calaroga Shark Media.
November 11th, 1417. After 39 years of chaos, scandal, and competing papal claims, the cardinals finally elected a pope that all of Europe could accept. Martin V's election at the Council of Constance ended the most devastating crisis in papal history, when three different men had simultaneously claimed to be the true successor of St. Peter. The Great Schism had torn apart the unity of European Christianity. Kings had chosen sides between rival popes, armies had fought battles in the name of competing papal claimants, and ordinary Catholics had been forced to decide which of three men actually possessed divine authority to guide their souls. For nearly 4 decades, the question, "Who is the real Pope?" had no clear answer. The Roman line claimed legitimacy through unbroken succession from St. Peter. The Avignon line argued that papal authority resided wherever the Pope actually governed the Church. The Pisan line insisted that church councils possessed authority to depose illegitimate popes and elect legitimate replacements. Each papal claimant excommunicated his rivals, appointed his own cardinals, and demanded obedience from the Catholic faithful. The result was institutional chaos that brought the medieval papacy to the brink of complete collapse and forced the Church to confront fundamental questions about the nature of papal authority itself. Today, we examine the crisis that split the Catholic Church into 3 competing factions and nearly destroyed the papal office that had dominated European civilization for over 1,000 years. This is White Smoke, Episode 41, The Great Schism. Lay in the Avignon papacy, the 70-year period when the popes had resided in France rather than Rome under the protection and influence of the French crown. This Babylonian captivity had damaged papal credibility throughout Europe, while creating institutional structures that would prove difficult to abandon when political circumstances changed. The return of the papal court to Rome in 1377 under Gregory XI was intended to restore papal independence and credibility, but it created new problems that its architects had not anticipated. The French cardinals who dominated the papal court found Rome uncomfortable, politically dangerous, and financially disadvantageous compared to their previous situation in Avignon. When Gregory died in March 1378, the Roman populace demanded the election of an Italian pope who would maintain the papal court in Rome permanently. The cardinals, most of whom were French, reluctantly elected Urban VI, an Italian who promised to respect their interests while keeping the papacy in Rome. Urban's transformation from accommodating candidate into reforming zealot represented one of the most dramatic personality changes in papal history. The man who had been elected as a compromise candidate immediately began attacking the luxury, corruption, and French orientation of the papal court with a harshness that shocked even supporters of reform. Urban's denunciations of cardinalatial wealth and his threats to pack the College of Cardinals with Italian appointees convinced the French cardinals that they had made a catastrophic mistake. Within months of his election, they were openly questioning the validity of his election and seeking ways to remove him from office. The cardinals' declaration in August 1378 that Urban's election had been invalid due to Roman mob pressure created an unprecedented constitutional crisis. If Urban's election was indeed invalid, then his acts as pope, including his appointment of new cardinals, were also invalid. But if his election was valid, then the cardinals' rebellion constituted schism and heresy. The election of Clement VII by the rebellious cardinals in September 1378 created the institutional framework for the schism that would devastate European Christianity for the next 4 decades. 2 men now claimed legitimate papal authority, each supported by different groups of cardinals and different European powers. The geographic and political divisions that emerged from the dual papal election reflected the underlying tensions in European politics, rather than theological disagreements about Christian doctrine. France, Scotland, Castile, and Aragon supported the Avignon Pope, while England, Germany, most of Italy, and Eastern Europe remained loyal to the Roman claimant. These political alignments meant that the papal schism became entangled with every major European conflict, as opposing sides could claim religious justification for their political objectives, while portraying their enemies as supporters of illegitimate papal authority. The 100 Years' War between England and France was simultaneously a dynastic conflict and a religious war between competing papal allegiances. The theological implications of the schism were devastating for traditional theories of papal authority. If the Pope possessed unique divine authority as successor of St. Peter, how could two men simultaneously claim this authority? If papal authority was indivisible, which claimant represented genuine continuity with apostolic succession? Catholic intellectuals struggled to resolve these questions through increasingly complex theological arguments that satisfied no one and convinced few. The most honest observers admitted that human reason could not determine which papal line possessed legitimate authority, leaving the choice to political calculation rather than religious conviction. The emergence of a third papal line following the Council of Pisa in 1409 transformed the dual schism into a triple crisis that made the situation even more absurd and theologically untenable. The Council's election of Alexander V was intended to end the schism by deposing both existing claimants, but it succeeded only in adding a third competitor to an already impossible situation. The multiplication of papal claimants demonstrated the bankruptcy of traditional theories about papal authority, while creating practical problems that threatened the basic functioning of church government. With 3 different popes appointing bishops, granting benefices, and issuing contradictory decisions, local church administration became chaotic and corrupt. The financial implications of the triple schism were as serious as its theological problems. Each papal court maintained expensive administrative structures while competing for the same limited sources of church revenue. The cost of supporting 3 papal bureaucracies drained resources that should have supported pastoral care and charitable activities. More seriously, the multiplication of papal authority created opportunities for corruption that undermined respect for church leadership throughout Europe. Ambitious clerics could shop among the 3 papal courts for the most favorable terms, while secular rulers could manipulate competing papal claims to extract concessions that would have been impossible under unified papal authority. The Council of Constance represented the Catholic Church's desperate attempt to resolve a crisis that threatened its continued existence as a unified institution. The Council's assertion of authority over papal claims challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of church government, while providing the only practical means of ending the schism. The Council's deposition of all 3 papal claimants in 1417 required unprecedented assertions of conciliar authority that contradicted traditional teachings about papal supremacy. If church councils possessed authority to depose legitimate popes, then papal claims to supreme authority were false. But if councils lacked such authority, then the schism was insoluble through institutional means. The election of Martin V by the Council of Constance finally provided Europe with a pope that all parties could accept, but only through procedures that implicitly rejected traditional theories of papal authority. The new pope owed his legitimacy to conciliar election rather than cardinalatial choice, establishing precedents that would influence church government for centuries. Martin's subsequent efforts to restore traditional papal authority while suppressing conciliar theories created new tensions that would persist throughout the 15th century. The Pope, who had been elected by a council, spent his reign attempting to prevent future councils from limiting papal power in ways that his own election had established. The resolution of the Great Western Schism through conciliar action left unresolved fundamental questions about the nature of authority within the Catholic Church. The crisis had demonstrated that papal claims to supreme authority could not withstand institutional breakdown, while the solution had required assertions of conciliar power that contradicted traditional ecclesiology. The long-term effects of the schism on papal authority were more subtle but more lasting than its immediate resolution suggested. European rulers had learned that papal authority could be manipulated through support for competing claimants, while intellectuals had discovered that church government was more fragile and contingent than traditional theories acknowledged. The emergence of national churches during the schism period established patterns of royal control over ecclesiastical affairs that would persist long after papal unity was restored. Kings who had been forced to choose between competing papal claims during the crisis discovered that they could maintain effective control over church affairs regardless of papal preferences. The financial independence that national churches developed during the schism reduced papal influence over European ecclesiastical affairs, while providing secular rulers with resources and authority that enhanced their power at papal expense. The schism that had weakened papal authority had correspondingly strengthened royal control over church affairs. The intellectual damage inflicted by the schism on traditional theories of papal authority provided foundation for later challenges to papal supremacy during the Protestant Reformation. The theologians who had questioned papal claims during the conciliar period established precedents and arguments that Protestant reformers would employ with devastating effect. The Great Western Schism revealed the essential fragility of institutions that claim divine authority while depending on human support for their effectiveness. The crisis demonstrated that even the most ancient and revered religious authorities remain vulnerable to political manipulation and institutional breakdown when their claims exceed their practical power. The papal office that emerged from the schism was both stronger and weaker than its predecessor. Stronger because the resolution had eliminated competing claims and restored institutional unity, but weaker because the crisis had revealed the contingent nature of papal authority and the possibility of successful resistance to papal claims. The lesson of the Great Western Schism remains relevant for any institution that claims ultimate authority. Such claims are only as strong as the consensus that supports them, and that consensus can dissolve more quickly than institutional theories suggest when practical circumstances change. White Smoke is a production of Calaroga Shark Media, portions of which were made with the help of AI narration, but still written and produced by real podcasters, Mark Francis and John McDermott.